and welcome to Dip In and Out with Lucy, the podcast that opens up the discussion around domestic abuse. I'm here this afternoon with Maya. Maya is from C.I.C, and it's probably best to allow Maya to explain what C.I.C is in more detail. Good afternoon, Maya.
Afternoon. Thank you so much, Lucy, for having me on. Yes, I'm the founder of Safeguarding Animal and Human Survivors of Sexual and Domestic Abuse, C.I.C, and we're a new-ish organisation. So we started in around November last year, and our main aim is to raise awareness of the link between animal abuse, cruelty, neglect, and abuse of humans. My specialism being how it links to violence against women and girls. Within domestic abuse, coercive controlling behaviour. And then I also kind of, outside of that, have an interest in kind of animal sexual abuse, both within domestic abuse situations and outside of. And although we're not going to be discussing that in any great detail today, it's kind of what I call the last taboo, because I feel like animal sexual abuse is even less well known about than child sexual abuse. So it's a really, and there's a really interesting link between the two. They found about 80% of cases where police found images of child sexual abuse images, they also found animal sexual abuse images.
Wow.
There's a really strong link between those who abuse children and those who abuse animals. So yeah, that's my background. And C.I.C, we do training, or we will have a suite of training available, pitched to different sectors. So kind of the pet professional kind of sector, so your groomers, behaviourists, vets, and also non-pet professionals. So I'm looking to speak with social services, police, and frontline violence against women, domestic abuse services, so that they are able to take into account knowledge around animal abuse when they're risk assessing and looking to effectively safeguard survivors. So yeah, I don't know if it's worth me just saying a little bit about my background, or like how I got into.
Yeah, absolutely.
So just a bit about what I did before C.I.C. So I worked frontline with survivors of sexual and domestic abuse. So I'm a qualified ISVA, and I did that for several years. And before I was an ISVA, I did voluntary work for kind of the local rape crisis helpline and Citizens Advice Bureau. So I've done kind of survivor support for around 6 years. And then I moved into training. So for the last 5 years, I've been working as a violence against women, domestic abuse and sexual violence trainer for a national Welsh charity. And I kind of lead on the trauma-informed approaches and sexual violence and kind of the animal abuse stuff there as well. So and then C.I.C came about just because I got my dog Podrick in 2019.
I love that name.
He was all right at the beginning. And the more I became interested in kind of canine behaviour, well-being and welfare, the more I realised that kind of that sector really didn't understand like their unique position within like safeguarding. So originally it started out with targeting kind of that industry, and then it has kind of grown from there to kind of plug that gap really. So yeah, that's a bit about me.
That's amazing. And a bit, that's a heck of a lot, I would say. And that's the thing that I love about doing this podcast is the number of people that you get to meet who are doing things that nobody would ever think needed to be done, in areas. People have this preconception around domestic abuse, a lot of people do anyway, and they think that it's only affects a certain portion of society, and once you're out of the situation, that's it, all those kind of things. And what many people don't understand, that's what we're trying to do, isn't it, is to break down that barrier to understanding and to kind of the knowledge sharing and saying, actually, these things go on, and they go on a lot more than you actually realize. And I think with animals, you made a really good point before then about the link between child abuse and abusing animals. And so often, if you or people I've spoken to will say that they would harm their dog or the cat or whatever, but on the surface this person is like charming, lovely, all the rest, but are quite happy to abuse the animal behind the scenes. And that's where it's obviously very, very similar to how a human being is abused on the surface. And on the outside, the perpetrator can come across to the world as this lovely charmer and a really nice, no one would ever suspect for 1 second that behind closed doors they were that person.
Yeah.
And it's heartbreaking as well, because as much as human beings and as much as victims and survivors find it very difficult to look for support, and no one's saying it's easy, it's very daunting, and it's also very difficult to make that decision, to look for support. How does an animal, how can they communicate that they are being harmed and being abused? I mean, it's really heartbreaking. And we're such a country that we love our pets and we love our animals.
Yeah, so I had the statistics here around I think it's something like there's 65 million domestic animals in households.
Wow.
In the UK. And when you cross over that amount with the official statistics, which we know are an underestimation, the 1.6 million women and girls over the age of 16, you start to really see how, if that amount of households have a pet and that amount of households are being subjected to domestic abuse, there is a huge crossover. And like you say, with the animals, they often live in a state of fear similar to the human. So my specialism is dogs, so I might slip into kind of speaking about dogs as examples, but all pets, all sentient beings experience fear, and that looks different for different animals. I think the unique thing about dogs, because I do my dog stuff as well, my canine behaviour and wellbeing stuff, and trauma in dogs. And the interesting thing is, as a society, some of the ways that we acceptably treat dogs could technically be seen as abusive. So it's a really interesting area when we're trying to get people's understanding of animal abuse within the context of domestic abuse. Also looking at what constitutes animal abuse for society generally.
Right.
So, for example, at the minute there's a lot of conversation around the e-collars, so electric collars, which shock collars. In Wales, they're illegal, but they're still legal in other places. And I don't want to get too controversial about training techniques, because it is a really controversial topic. But what could be seen as legal, it's still potentially having an impact on that dog. And I talk a lot about disruption of the companion animal human bond. So the victim survivor and the animal, the perpetrator, will kind of, just like any other unique and special bond that person has, they'll seek to disrupt it, cut them off. Even like keeping, so there's an example where the survivor and the dog were never allowed to be in the same room together. And when you think about like how heartbreaking that is for the human who knows their dog's on that other side of the
and they
door,
give you so much love, it
can't go and comfort them, and that dog knows that they're secure attachment, their person is on the inside of the door, and they can't. And dogs have cognitive ability and emotional capacity of about a 3-year-old. So one of the things I'm kind of passionate about as well is positioning the family pet. And I talk about dogs a lot because that's my area of interest, but also when you look at statistically the type of animal, the species of animal that are most used by the perpetrator is dogs. And so positioning the family pet within a whole family approach. So this is a kind of a buzzword that we hear in our sector a lot of the time, like whole family approach, whole systems approach. But my argument is, if you do not include the animal and kind of professionals around that animal, it's kind of like that missing puzzle piece. Like you're not actually practically information sharing in a meaningful way, which then can have a knock-on effect on safeguarding and protection for children and humans and the animal themselves as well.
And it's and that's what's so heartbreaking, isn't it? Because they are so loving and they give so much love, and they do it unconditionally. And just when you were saying then about the electric collars, and like you say, it's controversial, obviously, and banned in certain places. I personally don't think they should exist, but that's my opinion, and I'm quite happy to say that's my opinion. But one thing it does demonstrate, I think, if an owner feels the need, to me anyway, this is me thinking this, is that again is somebody exerting their power and control by inflicting pain basically, and hurting, you know, a living thing. And that to me, I can't get my head around. And that's where that similarity is with obviously with domestic abuse is, and it is abuse, because why would you want to do that? Because all a perpetrator wants is power and control.
Yeah,
They want to
yeah,
keep that power and control and keep you, or keep the pet subservient to them. And
yeah,
that's where to me it's like so obvious, but
yeah.
maybe
I've
not
said
so.
that. So I it feels like ages ago, but at the beginning of January, I wrote up the dog abuse matrix. I'm happy to share it if anyone wants to see it. But exactly that. What they want is kind of total compliance and obedience from the animal in all
Yeah.
situations, under all circumstances. Often it's seen as kind of like an ego boost as well, like,
Mm.
look what I can,
Look
you
what
know,
I can do.
yeah, look what
Yeah.
I can make my dog do. I can make them, you know, stay there or not eat, or, you know, all these other things. And it's like just very control, and
Mm.
really, really nth degree control. When you think about how much we have control over our pets' lives generally, you know, well, when they eat, where they eat,
Yeah.
when they go out, where they
Where they
toilet, you know,
sleep. Yeah. All
what
of
they
yeah.
wear, like, you know, all those types of things. So, and then when you add on to that, kind of that insidious hierarchy of, you know, I'm
Yeah.
the master, they need to do what I say. And we often have this thing around, you know, they'll position the pet as being disrespectful or stubborn or whatever if they don't do
Yeah.
what they want them to do.
What them to
But
do.
when we look at actual dog behavior itself, the dogs don't have that type of like malicious behavior. They don't do things just to kind of spite humans.
Yeah.
They're not doing something either because there's an unmet need. There might be pain, but often there's fear involved. But the other
So
interesting thing is, for some animals, um, they actually do what's called appeasement behaviours with the perpetrator, and
okay.
that's like they will go over to the perpetrator. They will kind of like lick them and be kind of
Mm.
around them, and that's kind of like a friend response. So in you know, in children and in humans, it's like a friend response where sometimes when we feel threat, instead of going into fight, flight, freeze, or flop, we go into kind of, we smile, we try and minimize.
Yeah.
So lots of
Yeah.
survivors will kind of try and bargain with the perpetrator to kind of
Mm.
keep them
Keep the
on side.
peace, sort of.
Yeah,
Yeah.
keep the
Yeah.
peace. And obviously that's never within our control. We try it, but it's always their decision what happens next. It's kind of similar for dogs. They have the friend response. So they lots of them kind of go, and breed matters as well, but lots of them go into kind of appeasement behavior. So it's kind of like lots of
Wow.
licking, lots of kind of like going into kind of
Mm.
making yourself smaller, kind of leaning or
Oh,
whatever. But sometimes that can look like, to the untrained eye, that can look like, oh, they like that person.
yeah.
And the perpetrator can use that against the victim survivor as well. So they can say, look, the dog's come to me, the dog
Absolutely.
loves me, doesn't love you, but actually the dog's just so terrified
Just
that
so
it's trying,
terrified. Yeah.
yeah, it's
Yeah.
trying to appease the
Mm.
perpetrator, but then the perpetrator will weaponize
I
that.
was just going to say they'll turn it
Yeah,
around. They'll, the coercion, the
yeah,
belief, the gaslighting to say, oh, it's you, you're the problem.
yeah,
It's not
yeah,
me.
yeah.
They love me. Look at what they're. Yeah, you're
And
right.
I think, you know, right at the beginning of the relationships, you know, we say the perpetrator does that kind of information mining where they're really charming and they want to find out what matters to you most. And for those many of us that have pets, our pets are kind of, you know, I've yet to meet someone who has a pet that if you didn't give them the opportunity to talk about their pet,
Yeah,
they wouldn't talk about their pet for like
that's so
hours and
true.
hours and hours. And
Yeah.
I'm one of those people as well. So I always say, you know, don't get me started, because that'll be it. I'll be
Yeah.
and unfortunately, that's really great information for those who
Mm.
are seeking to harm us, because they weaponize that love and that kind of
Find out
relationship.
what your weak spots are,
Yeah,
where
yeah, yeah,
you're
your vulnerability.
yeah, vulnerable
Yeah,
spots. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. And it's so
And
sad to label it as a vulnerability, because
mm,
really it's a sacrosanct relationship with
yeah,
another
it
living
is.
being.
Shouldn't be
Um,
vulnerable.
yeah, that
Mm.
in a way that like, and like I think we said before we started recording, you know, animals have this really unique ability to really see us and accept us, and
Yeah,
you know, for who we are. And so
absolutely.
lots of us are able to be vulnerable in the as a strength based thing with
Mm.
our animals. So it kind of becomes even more upsetting to think that someone will then
Would
try and disrupt
would
that.
try and hurt them
um
exactly. And
yeah,
if you because what I like, well, sometimes when I'm doing things like this, and it may not seem obvious to people, if you, as a member of the public or in your family, whatever, if you had concerns and you were worried that this was going on, and you felt that you maybe could go and find more information or find support, I mean, obviously RSPCA would be, maybe, I don't know, who would you go
Well,
and speak? That's what I mean. It's difficult.
yeah.
Who do you speak to
So it's a
apart from
really
yourself?
yeah. So it's a really interesting thing. So um the two kind of main, so depending on where you live geographically, there are some charities that do pet fostering. So if you're looking to
Okay.
flee domestic abuse,
Yeah.
there are some charities that will be able to kind of take in your pet depending on the type, because obviously we're talking mainly about your stereotypical pets like your cats, your dogs, your rabbits,
Yeah.
but people also have exotic pets, people
Yeah.
have fish, people have
Snakes.
horses,
Yeah.
or farm animals,
Yeah.
and that are much harder to kind of take out of the environment that they need. And I think we sometimes do default to thinking about the cute and fluffy animals when we talk about coercive
Mm.
control, but in pieces of research, there's been, they've put bleach in the fish tank, and so it's some people are really, that's their hobby. They love their fish. They're like, so for some of us, fish are like, we're not really sure.
Yeah.
I'm not a fish person. Like, obviously, I would never want them to be harmed. But for
Yeah.
some people, that's their thing. They really
Yeah. Exactly.
they
Yeah.
love their fish, and to have bleach poured in, having to watch them
God.
die. I've heard of people. They'll kill a rabbit and they'll cook it and make them eat it. But some of it, that's kind of like a more extreme end, and I think we do tend to default to the physical side when we
Yeah.
talk about abuse. And whilst perpetrators will physically harm the pet, arguably more often sometimes than they'll physically harm the person, for
Yeah.
multiple reasons. I'll come back to the fostering, don't let me forget.
Yeah. No,
For
no.
multiple reasons. One is that as a society, we still don't see animal harm as kind of the same as human harm. So
Yeah.
our sentencing structures, our investigations around animal cruelty are not as strong as when they're
As
for
human.
people. And
Yeah.
then obviously and then strong in air quotes, because
Yeah.
we talk about domestic abuse, that's an argument for another day as well. So that they know that obviously it will be taken less seriously. The
Yeah.
impact on them will be less if they were caught. Um, Animals are kind of highly disposable, so it's quite easy
Mm.
to kill an animal and get rid of it
Get
and
away
know
with it.
where it is,
Yeah.
and then get a new one very easily.
Yeah.
I mean, we don't even know where to start with trying to estimate the number of animals that have been killed
That
by
nobody knows about. Yeah.
I mean,
Because
because we
is
don't
it just that they've
record
gone missing? Oh, are they lost?
missing, or we don't record it, which I know is when part of SASTA's thing is to really get everyone who's involved in domestic abuse in any form
Mm.
um thinking a bit more, like asking the questions a bit better, recognizing the signs a bit better, and recording and sharing that information.
Yeah.
So yeah, and they physically will harm the animal, but it's not just about physical abuse. So under the new Domestic Abuse Act in the UK, not letting your dog go to the vet, or not
Yes.
paying for food, is seen as economic abuse under the law,
Yeah.
because pets are still seen as property under the law. So there's that element there as well. So there's an economic element to it, and then for me, it's also the emotional. So we often, as a society, again, lots of us know that animals have emotions, but it's still a little bit controversial. In some people don't
Yeah.
quite get that they have deep emotions, and though those emotions may not be exactly the same as ours, they
Mm.
are, the stereotypical pets at least are emotional beings. So like they experience deep fear, and that fear can come out as trauma. So lots of our
Yeah.
animals, cats, dogs, etc., who have lived in a domestic abuse household have trauma, and the trauma that they elicit is quite similar to children.
Oh,
Um,
it's
so, it can
heartbreaking.
impact their toileting, it can impact their
Mm.
sleeping, it can impact their ability to, have fear around humans. So, they might even have like flashbacks,
Mm.
disassociation. They might have triggers. So, like lots, you hear every now and then people say, oh, he doesn't like men.
Yes.
He doesn't
Yeah.
like men,
I don't like people with glasses. I've heard that
yeah,
one
yeah,
before.
yeah.
Yeah.
And that's not to say, every dog that's scared of this specific person has been abused. That's not, but there is, there is a chance that that might have happened. So it's the emotional aspect on the animal as well. Here's Hector.
Oh, I was just gonna
Those listening, the cats.
listen. This wouldn't be a good episode if we didn't have an animal.
Pet,
That
yeah.
timed perfectly. It's just like, just letting you know I'm still here.
Yeah. So they abuse them in lots of different ways. And it's not just kind of a physical way of harming the animal. They might give the animal away, so like they'll threats, like we know for lots of in domestic abuse generally, threats alone are extremely useful to the perpetrator,
Yeah.
because if someone didn't even have to touch my animals, they just have to say that they will hurt my animals, I will do whatever they want me to do,
Yeah. Yeah.
because it's the same with children. So
Yeah.
so it's sometimes the pet doesn't even have to be physically harmed for there to be harm.
It is that underlying threat, or the threat has
Yeah,
actually been
yeah,
issued,
yeah,
and now you're on a warning kind
yeah.
of thing. Yeah.
And also, like, sometimes they'll weaponize the animal. So I know some people who are really, they're terrified of dogs. So for some reason, or whatever. And
Mm.
sometimes there's a cultural element. So I always remember when I was house sharing in my 20s, and I lived with a Turkish couple, and they were lovely. But in Turkey, well, they said to me, in Turkey they don't have like cats as pets. So when I had my two cats, that at first they were kind of like scared of the cat. And they I shouldn't laugh, because it's
No, well, okay, of course, yeah.
yeah, I shouldn't have. Sorry, I didn't mean to say you did. It was, but within a week they loved the cats and they were cuddling with
Yeah,
them. But that's the way that you can weaponize the animal,
absolutely.
is
Play on
if so,
fear.
yeah. So if you're scared of an animal, so if you're scared of snakes, if you're scared of spiders, the perpetrator might bring a spider or a snake or a dog into the house. They might have a dog that they've trained to be aggressive, which is just,
Yes.
it's psychologically for the dog. It's horrible to me that someone would take an animal and make them so scared or whatever, that they've made them that aggressive. So then it's a really effective
Yeah.
tool. So there's lots of different ways that they can use animals.
And it's
Um,
also, it's not obvious unless you're saying it now. These are the kind of things, and again, that's the link, isn't it, with domestic abuse? It's all those subtle things that could be explained away.
yeah,
Like you say, like that, oh, well, they love me, and even though I use the
yeah.
electric, zapper, whatever they're called, the withholding food, or there'd always be an excuse, wouldn't there? Like, well, I haven't got enough money
Yeah,
this week, or there's always something. And I
yeah,
think that's the frightening thing, is these are all the things that could easily go undetected and be explained away, because that's precisely what a perpetrator does. They have an
yeah,
answer for everything,
yeah,
and they twist everything around.
yeah.
And
And they'll just be like, sometimes the, I don't like the word jealous, because it's used as an excuse for behavior a lot of the time.
yeah,
But they really don't like the victim survivors having anyone else that they can lean on for support, because ultimately what
mm,
they want is complete dependence on them.
yes,
And if you have an animal which you can gain love, like we said, unconditional love and
yeah,
affection from, then you've always got some sort of hope. You've got something to latch on to,
yes,
and that's dangerous to the perpetrator. So
mm.
that's where that kind of want to push you apart. So
Separate
they'll
them.
weaponize it in kind of like, you love that dog more than me, it's just an animal,
Mm,
it's weird that, they'll kind of use all that kind of, so they'll just um constantly erode your,
mm.
like, they'll gaslight you into thinking that you're mentally unwell because you love an animal, because you do this,
Because
this and this.
yeah,
um yeah, so
because that's
and
where you're getting your
children,
love and care from. That's
yeah.
where that's coming
And we
from.
know that animal pets within a domestic abuse household are a protective factor for the adult victim survivor and any children.
Yeah,
And in fact, as of August 2023, the UN, so United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child, they added to the in there under UN General Comment 26, they said that no child should witness animal abuse. And so that's a really interesting development to
It
see
is,
how
yeah.
we're going to enshrine that in our legislation. So Scotland, as of, I shared it, I can't remember if it was this week or last week, they've enshrined that in their under their law now.
Wow.
But it's how yeah, so it's really, really
Yeah.
interesting to see how is this going to
How's it
uh,
going to play out? Yeah. How's it
yeah,
going to be
because
yeah.
because the UK is a signatory of the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child. Yeah, here we go. So they've yeah, just incorporated a new bill in December 2023.
Wow. So that's quite a quick turnaround if it was
Children
only
must be
last year.
protected from all forms of physical and psychological violence and from exposure to violence, such as domestic abuse or violence inflicted on animals.
Mm.
So it's the first time we've kind of seen that recognition of the link
Mm.
in a
Interesting.
legal document. So it's a really exciting.
It's a good step in the right direction, isn't it? It's
I
that's
think, I
amazing.
mentioned the link between child sexual abuse and animal sexual abuse, but even when there's no sexual abuse, animal abuse occurs in 88% of cases where there's physical violence against a child.
Wow.
So these are massive numbers.
88. That's
88%.
huge.
Yeah. So
Wow.
they're massive. And a history of pet abuse was found to be one of the most significant risk factors in someone becoming a perpetrator of domestic abuse as well.
Yeah.
And we know that when children witness animal abuse, so when it all links, this is the interesting thing about it, so it all
Yeah.
links because what the research says is if you abuse animals as a child, so if that's
Mm.
a normalized environment for you, there's some argument that that impacts your ability to form like relationships later
Yeah,
on,
that's
and then it's a
yeah.
significant risk factor for potentially becoming a domestic abuse perpetrator. So
And you can see why, if you as a child think it's acceptable to
harm
hurt.
another living thing, yeah.
Yeah. And that's God, you see, this is what I love about this is it opens up such important conversations around things that people probably don't even realize, and like with domestic abuse, and one thing that regularly either I will say it or the professional will say it is we get to a point where you're either directly or indirectly impacted by abuse. There isn't anybody that can
Yeah.
say it doesn't affect me. Well, it might not affect you directly, but it could be a family member, it could be a work colleague, it could be a friend. There's no
It could
escape
be a
for.
pet that you've rescued. So lots of the things that I talk about when I talk to the canine behaviourist sector is that your human client may have rescued a dog
Yeah,
that has this trauma
yeah,
because they've been domestically
because
abused.
they've been
So
abused.
like like you say, it affects everyone in
Yeah,
so many different ways, and so it's really important that we understand it and that we understand the risk
yeah.
posed. So the um, perpetrators of domestic abuse who are also abuse animals,
Mm.
statistically they will use more violence. So in terms of risk, that's why animal abuse is this really key indicator of abuse.
Yes, that's
And
a
and
good
so
point.
that's why I was thinking, what part of SASTA, what we're trying to do is get people to think more like, okay, when we have domestic homicide reviews, is there a history of animal abuse? Because
Yes.
I dip sampled some domestic homicide reviews from the because they're public access. And I really struggled to find any reference to animals at all. But where someone
Interesting.
has a pet or had a pet,
Mm.
those questions should be asked
Yeah.
because it could be that within that domestic homicide timeline, when we're trying to prevent domestic
Mm.
homicide, it's something we should look at in
Yeah.
terms of risk assessing. So the dash and the
The dash
domestic
rip.
risk
Yeah.
assessment
Yeah.
and the and even stalking. So we started talking at the beginning before we recorded about post-separation abuse,
Mm.
and the animal can be used in post-separation abuse. So nowadays it's quite in some maybe the young demographic, there's this custody. So I've seen people sharing custody of the animal where
Custody
they
of
don't
it.
have
Yeah.
children. Yeah,
Yeah.
so like then there's elements of the coercive control that come in around that. Um,
Yes.
there's loads of, whether it's post-separation or in there, you've got air tags that will be attached to the
Yeah.
collar, the harness. You've got those GPS trackers now that are sold as, if
Yes.
you lose your pet or whatever.
But
But
that can also
perpetrators,
be. Oh,
yeah,
wow.
so
Good to
perpetrators
know.
will co-opt anything, obviously, won't they?
Yeah.
So they'll co-opt anything that will help them in their
Yeah.
abuse. So they might time. they might time, the walk, how long it should have taken
Yeah.
you, and all of that
Know
kind of
where you've gone, know where you've
yeah, where you've
taken the
gone,
pet.
yeah. And
Yeah,
then post-separation abuse, lots of us walk our dogs at the same time, in the same place. In terms of stalking, that's gold for them. Like,
of
they know where
course.
it's gonna
Yeah,
be. They know what vet clinic we are, they know the vet, they've
yeah.
got the microchip details. Sometimes they'll have the microchip details in their name.
That's
So
that's that is scary. That is
yeah,
frightening. And when you start talking it on that level, and it just when you were saying that, it was also making me think in terms of post-separation abuse, if children are involved, then again, it's well, if you want to see your
yeah.
pet, then you're gonna, if, for example, God forbid, the animal is left with the perpetrator because you're obviously trying to, remove yourself or your children from the situation.
Sometimes they'll gift the animal as a way of mating. So a
Yeah,
piece of research found that gifting animals is quite common.
yeah,
And there is some evidence that, some perpetrators where where the partners have separated, they've gone and got the children and animal, but because obviously it's shared custody, the animal has to go. So like the hamster where has to go from and the mum didn't want the hamster, and it's just like another way of pushing that coercive
push it.
control
Yeah,
behaviour um
wow.
really on. So just to quickly go back to fostering before I forget,
I
as we're
love
talking
that. I was gonna bring you back round to it, but I
about
love the fact that you did it yourself.
because we're talking about post-separation abuse and leaving kind of thing. So there are a number of charities that offer pet fostering services. So the
Yes.
big ones are Dogs Trust Freedom Program. And they're obviously dogs. So if you have a dog and you're looking to leave a situation, you can contact them, or your support worker can contact them. So that's another way. And then they have a kind of a process of getting that animal out, and they'll foster
Yeah.
them usually in an area that's not related. So you know how refuge works, you don't get placed in the geographical area where you're fleeing from. It's the same, but the survivor will get updates from them.
Oh,
um,
that's good.
but
Yeah.
yeah, so Dogs Trust have that. And I really encourage anyone to kind of go and look at their information in their website.
Yeah.
And then you've also got the Cats Protection. They've got the new Lifeline program. Used to be Paws Protect, but it's now a Lifeline. And they are coming into Wales as well, as in the next year. So most of the country, not all of the country, is covered by those two charities. But Cats Protection, again, similar. So they'll help with if there's a cat. And then there's some local charities. If
Right.
you know the geographical area that you're in, you can kind of Google it and see what covers your area.
Okay.
So down in the south, you've got Refuge for Pets, and they rescue in a really specific area. So I think it's Devon and Cornwall, that
Right.
kind of
I
way.
might try and get some of these on the because obviously the resources page, what I always try and do
Yeah.
is just keep building it and building it.
If
So
you go
get
on the SASTA website, I've got a
yeah,
services page. It's got them all listed there, so you can take them
perfect.
from there.
Well, I think if I've not already, I'll get SASTA on my resources, and then that can
Yeah,
link
sure.
and as
Yeah,
well. And then
yeah,
you've got all the other extra ones
yeah,
on there
yeah.
that that's
Because the
amazing.
important thing with SASTA is obviously I don't do any sort of physical frontline kind of support, and they do. So I'm always
Right.
kind of
Yeah.
plugging them. I think that's a
Yeah.
collaborative thing to do as well, isn't it? Is to make
Absolutely.
sure
Yeah.
people know where to go. So there are options. But yeah, when you look at leaving, those so on average the statistic is on average it takes around 30 instances before someone will consider leaving or trying to leave. When there's a pet involved, it goes up to 50,
Right.
because the other issue that we have is housing generally. So
Mm.
refuge don't generally allow
Pets. Yeah.
pets in unless they're like assistance animals.
Yeah.
And assistance animals, I think, I don't know if you saw my post on LinkedIn about the use of assistance animals as a tactic of coercive control. So where
Yes.
someone has an assistance dog, for example, you know, taking that animal, not allowing that animal to task properly for that person means that they are further isolated from being able to
Yeah.
work, or go outside, or dress, or
Or
medically put them at
socialize
risk.
or any, yeah.
Yeah,
Wow.
because the dog may perform things like uh, deep body pressure if they're having a panic attack, or they might, in terms of if the blood pressure drops, they'll let them know so they can go and take medication. And if you prevent them from doing their job, that's a health risk for the person as well.
Yeah.
So So in refuge, normally you're not allowed to take pets in, and we could do a whole another talk about that, because I have kind of very strong feelings about it, because people think that then why don't we just have pet-friendly refuges? I personally don't think that's a good idea, or necessarily the best option for the animal, because again, we're looking at that from a very human-centric point of view.
And there's lots of people in refuge, and there's lots of different personalities.
Yeah.
There's all sorts going on.
And you might have, someone over there who's had their perpetrator use the dog to scare them, and they've got a really fear of dog. And then you're bringing a dog in, it's not fair. Everyone is, everyone has an equal right to be safe and refuge. And also, the thing with animals, dogs especially, is if they're quite unique looking, and even if they're, say, a black lab, which people say, oh, they all look the same. You as a parent of the dog, or parent, you know what the dog looks like. You could spot that. You could have 50 black labs, and you'll know which
one's yours. Yeah, exactly.
And so if it's a risk factor, because that dog still has to be walked. So
yes,
and then someone goes, oh, that dog looks like Bob's dog. Oh, hey Bob, I saw your dog. And then it's like, oh well, risk then for refuge generally. So so generally you can't take animals into refuge, and so whatever reason, that's a barrier. Lots of we do have pets. And then also, the private housing sector is a complete nightmare. I mean, we've got a shortage of housing generally. But when you look at pets, I know they've changed the law, but it's still a really sticky area. So, most people just feel like, I have nowhere to go with my animal. And lots of people will not leave without their animal until they know that animal is safe.
That's why it's heightened, and the numbers increases to why and how much longer you stay for, because you don't want to leave your pet behind. It's just, I mean, it is an absolute minefield, isn't it? And you're right. Personally, I think we could do another whole episode, I'm not going to lie. And I think we probably will. To be
you can
honest.
Get me back,
Get me back in. But that's, even just what we've done today is a bit of a whistle-stop tour, isn't it, of trying to explain it. But, the things that you've explained and the way you explain it is brilliant. And the work that you do is absolutely amazing. And there needs to be more of it, doesn't there? Definitely, because it's an area, again, when people talk about abuse and they have this idea in their mind, this stigma about what abuse is, they're not considering this angle as well. They're not considering all the animals that are being abused and being used as weapons, and being, it's absolutely heartbreaking, because at the top and bottom of it all a pet wants is to be loved and nurtured and cared for, and to care for you, and love you and protect you. And, I know we've got a cat, and I know every morning without fail, he will sit under the trampoline, and he's had his breakfast. So he's like, thanks very much. I've had my breakfast now. Now I'm going to go out and I'm going to protect this house from anybody, from that squirrel there or whoever, or the other cat from next, it's brilliant. And it's so lovely to watch him do that, because they are just such amazing personalities. And, like you say, once you start talking about your own, that's the
I mean, you could do the animal-human bond, which is known in research, is just so fascinating, because I do think for some of us, we have a biological, for thousands of years, for dogs, for example, and cats, we've evolved alongside these animals for thousands of years. I think there is like a almost deeply ingrained biological aspect to the relationship, but for some people who have that deep connection with their animal, that I think there's an additional element. It might not be proven by science, but it's my theory anyway.
I was going to say, but there's nothing like it, is there? There's nothing like that relationship. And I've just thought, then it's not me that goes on the trampoline, by the way, it's the children. It's not my trampoline. I don't put it, the trampoline is under you, and it's not me.
Whatever you do in your own time, Lucy, that's
whatever you choose to do in your own time is up to you. I have to admit, I did use it through lockdown as my form of exercise, because I thought I tell you what, you get your cardio going. You might feel like a complete fool when the neighbours are sort of see his head popping up and down like this, but but thank you so much, Maya. It's amazing to speak to you, and the work that you're doing, and in the space of time that you've built up what you're building up, and it's only going to go from strength to strength, that's obvious. But thank you so much.
Thank you very much for having me on, and see you soon.
Thank you.